Hi guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry, it's very loud there. But that probably means I have to listen to you more than speak for once, right?
Well, I just got in a trove of books from the MIT summer sale. 13 new volumes. The whole library is in disarray now. But it's a good excuse to dust everything.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So, Fred, where are you at the moment?
I'm at the crowd show.
Oh, right. So back in. Oh, by the way, did you finish downloading that stuff?
Yes, I have. But if you give me another day or two, just for safety.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, sure.
So it turns out we do have quite a bit of things. Some of it's Zoom, some of it's from the video. What's on the video is really, really bad quality. The sound is bad quality. Unfortunately, we have more Fabian than we need to, but he's not. Oops, oh no, he is here. We have your entire double session, Fabian. So that's being uploaded now, which is really, really nice because the presentations can always be done again. But a lot of that stuff that we did live, so to speak, is just really wonderful to have. Yeah, Fabian, please.
Hi everyone. First of all, I have a really hard time understanding you. There is a lot of background noise, so I'm not whining, but it's hard to get. But I got the part where the video was not lost. And why I'm grateful for this or happy about it is because some of it at the edge of my thinking process. Like it was really done both technically at the moment and some, let's say, new understanding. So it means I could do it again, but I don't know how much of it would be exactly the same. And so I was hoping to be able to watch it again, see what made sense, what also was maybe unintelligible or even wrong. So yeah, I'm super happy about it. I will still do it again better and hopefully deeper, but knowing that I can rely on what's been played before and eventually fix it is really good to hear. Thank you.
I'm uploading it at home, which is very slow, but when it's up, I will tell you. By the way, is the sound ever so slightly better? It's nice.
Yeah. There's
Yeah, a little better,
less
Little
bleed
better.
through from the. Hey,
So
a quick one while people are still filling in. Quick one for Fabien. I'm just finished writing something up, and it just occurred to me, if I put something, if you brought effectively a web, you brought an image that had an image map on it into VR, and then say you folded part of it, how does that affect the image map? Because it may be different for raster or vector. The answer is, I realize that there are all sorts of intuitions you can have about this, but I don't really know what the real answer is. I mean, I would assume that certainly in the case of a vector thing, it would realize that space had magically got smaller. For instance, if I folded it in the middle, folded away a bit. So in other words, this all boils down to what happens when I click in this space if the image map is the vector, the agent by which I indicate to the object I want to interact with it.
So my intuition would be, first, it won't work at all. Like you would display it, but my understanding is that the interesting aspect of the image map is you can interact with like one specific area of the image.
Yep.
That 100% sure doesn't work in XR. There are some hacks, some ways around it, but the hacks also don't have like good interaction. And because the interaction themselves, like, do you actually use your the controller? Would you use your finger as a kind of laser, or do you pinch at a specific area? That's all very different, not with the same result. And if you use the pointer, then you can point toward it, and regardless of distance, it's going to work. If it's pinching, it's different. But I think I would tend to want to, let's say, re-implement it, because as long as you have the map itself, I'm not even sure, because if, for example, you fold across one of the areas, you would have to take that into account.
Well, that's sort of what I thought. I mean, it's all obvious after the fact, but in a sense, where we are is we have something that conceptually seems to fill the gap we need, but actually, I don't think it's going to be that simple. And you're quite right. We might as well think to engineer it better for what we want to do. I mean, in other words, we're going to need the same sort of information that says, basically this object, for want of a better way of describing it, wants to have this, it wants to be able to pass this information if interacted with. And then how you implement it and what you attach as the sort of the next bit in the chain. It might probably just go and dereference a URL, even if it's local to that data object. So I won't go further down this, and I didn't mean to go off a particularly techie tangent, but I just wanted to check whether what I was writing wasn't completely bonkers, because it's going into the book.
Even if it's bonkers, because we're still exploring, I think it's fine.
Thanks.
So very quickly, if the folds is meaningful, so if, for example, you fold and it's like a table of content and with a UR key behind it, you would not fold in the middle of, let's say, a paragraph. So same here, you would not fold the image and have, let's say, half sections. You would probably make the whole thing either non-interactive because it's been folded, or so.
I was thinking more in the context of one of Bob's murals, where you might have for very sort of simplified argument, you might have a rectangle that's 10 units long and it happened to be folded for some other reason, so it's now 4 units long on your visual screen. So whether the thing knows it's now 6 units less wide, I don't know, and the answer is we probably shouldn't assume it does, which is fine.
But my point is,
for us to scroll.
my point is, if you fold in the middle and the middle has no, let's say, semantic information, because, for example, there is an offset, you have like on the side some information about how to read the mural. It would be the wrong way to fold it. Technically, it would work, let's say, but I don't think it's it's not meaningful. Whereas if it's the right fold where the mural has been, let's say in the middle, there are two parts left and right, and then you fold it so that the things on the side do have meaningful information once folded, then it's very different, and then we can still, let's say, make something out of it. Okay.
Apologies to others for what appeared to be a terribly technical diversion, but I'm just conscious that there's no point in us attaching the right information to the wrong metaphor. If when we come to use it, it doesn't serve us right. Peter, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, my intuition would be that the fold transformation should be orthogonal to the interaction of the image map. So your clicking or selection activity should get mapped through the fold distortion function or whatever, and the image map should be completely oblivious to where it is in 3D space, and it should work. But that's just my intuition, had I been the one designing the system from the ground up.
Yeah, agreed. Where I am is, I suspect that's probably where all our intuition goes, but I suspect that's not the reality as it exists now. Yeah.
Are we going to go on talking about folding for the rest of the? If so, I've got other things to do.
No,
I have a non-folding point I want to make
No.
before we move on. Okay.
No, we don't. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
So,
Bob,
okay. So what I wanted to share on the subject of hacks was I was able to get my 3D Space Mouse to interact with JavaScript in the web browser, and it's a bit of a hack because 3D Connection does not provide integration beyond using the Space Mouse and a browser to control zooming with its default setup. And it doesn't allow you, without going into C++ programming and their proprietary user interface toolkit, to get at the actual data coming off of the Space Mouse. However, their standard controller does have an option to allow moving the mouse in all 6 degrees of freedom to send keystrokes to an application. So what I have is like A through G as key codes being emitted, Control A through G through Control G being emitted by the Space Mouse. Then in JavaScript, IMBA has a hotkey feature that looks for control sequences like that and can then fire off local functions. And then I use data binding to change incrementally roll, pitch, and yaw on X, Y, and Z variables. Then I use CSS 3D transforms in order to take a little div with hello world in it and move it around in 3 space and then roll, pitch, and yaw and spin it. And it's a bit clunky, but it is workable. So that's the latest hack. Okay, handing off the mic.
I have to say, on the record, it's really annoying that Bob cuts you off and complains that it's not his favorite subject, because it's actually about his darn euros. Right, so I don't get that. One of the things that I'm desperate to do now is to get visual meta integrated, of course, and that includes other plans. So, you know, however it's done, we do need to have ways to address spaces in space, right? I would think that is one of the most core things we could possibly work on in this environment. And for our kind of demo day type event coming up soon, it's only about 5 months. If we can't share how things go up, we're losing out on a major aspect. So I'm wondering if I ignore everything Mark said in a loving way and ask you, Fabian, let's forget or not forget that image maps exist. From your experience so far, what is the best way to refer to different areas on a rectangle?
So my knee-jerk reaction is rectangle it's flat. So do we really? It means basically we need to use a laser pointer kind of metaphor, not really direct interaction. Let's say you can't pinch something completely flat. You would have, let's say, a a cube or something with a bit of depth in it. But of course, we can have a laser pointer and find ways to interact. I really don't think that's also I'm not familiar with a 3D mouse or using things behind us. I mean, of course, I'm familiar with a screen, normal screen and the mouse, but there are not necessarily that novel, no intuitive kind of ways to interact. Regardless, or that being said, however we implement it, as long as we have the data we want to represent, let's say an SVG or whatever the file format with the actual content and some geometric information, let's say the size of that rectangle and potentially what one can interact with. So for example, what part of that rectangle would be the part that one either highlights or modify, then it will work regardless of how we implement it. Not sure that made sense. That was understood.
This is a slight diversion, but I just got this from my son's school. That's how real VR is now. This is a normal English school. So they're not saying don't use it ever. They are saying, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
VR is pretty real.
It really is. I just as a kind of a slight tangent, I flew back from Norway yesterday, so I'm obviously in London, and slept for most of the flight. Woke up, started working in Author. I happened to be working in dark mode. In dark mode, I spent a lot of time polishing to make it the right kind of gray and all of that stuff. The lady sitting to my right, she said, "Oh, what's that? That is so much more pleasing on the eye than a white screen." So we started talking. Turns out she's a psychologist, she's Norwegian, we have mutual friends, all of that good stuff. Got along so well. She has many ideas. I'm sure she'll join the group at some point. But the highlight of the fact colors and fading and light make such a difference for our mood, our perceptions, our understanding. I had just decided 2 days earlier not to do any kind of word processor VR. It could be focused on reading. But when you write and when you read, there are very different requirements for how text should appear. It's completely different. Like the basic thing in Author is one column, the most column. But when you're in Reader, it should be many columns or 2 pages because it's a different thing. Of course, in VR, these differences will go even further. But I thought it was so fascinating. I wanted to highlight to you guys that maybe we should have a little bit of work on basic word processing in VR, just to play with the aesthetics of it. And I think a lot of techies will focus on the functionality, which is of course important, but also focus on what happens if it's this or that shading. What do you guys think? Just to elaborate a little bit, maybe we, with your help, Fabian, since we basically built it, we make a space where a lot of the variables can be tweaked. The size of things, the placement of things, the coloring of things, all that stuff. Because we may find out that there are some principles that we're not really aware of until we're in it. Rather than expecting writing to be either transparent or non-transparent background, big screen, and get on with it. Yeah, Mark, thanks.
It just occurred to me, there's another angle to this, and when one says word processing, is one basically doing text entry or writing. They're both forms of word processing, but again, they're slightly different. So one is just trying to get some characters into a box that represent what the right symbols appear in the right box in the way you meant them to, as opposed to the sort of the richer thing of sitting down to write a stream of thought. I mean, I certainly at the moment, I find it hard enough typing as it is without giving myself the extra difficulty of doing it in 3D. Now, that's not to mean it won't come, and it's not to mean that others won't be faster to that than someone like myself. So that's not a negative. But it just occurred to me as you were describing it that there is a nuance there as well in terms of the interaction. So when we use the broad term word processing, I'm assuming you're talking about effectively trying to write an article, as opposed to the already not necessarily good way of even just getting a few, few tens or 20 of characters into a text box, which is difficult at the moment. Again, the fact that it's difficult now doesn't mean it will be in the future, but it's another thing for us to look at as another potential sort of speed bump in things.
Yeah, Fabian, can you hear me slightly better for this moment?
Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes not. So
Okay.
maybe audio compression.
I'm just proposing that we may want to build a word processor in VR that's quite simple, not taking advantage of too many VR unique situations other than the purely visual elements, the color, the grading, just to see what it feels like. Maybe you're doing a certain type of writing, you want strong blue, maybe you want dark warmth or something else. And I'm thinking about what you have already built. Maybe that could potentially be a base, and there could be sliders, so to speak, for us to experiment with what works for certain things.
Yes, definitely. Yes, we have to see a bit. So dark mode or this kind of things. How, because the environment as is pretty flexible, but it's not really clear how to make, let's say, one of the changes you suggest. So that has changed quite a bit already during the last 2 weeks or so with doing demos to complete strangers and people in the group and doing it face to face. But one part that definitely does not exist is, let's say, some kind of documentation that, because some of the change you mentioned might be directly and pretty, I don't want to say easily, pretty quickly, let's say, done, and not by me, because that's the hope, let's say, is that not that anytime one of us has an idea, I have to do it, but rather that the person themselves, with a minimum amount of effort, could do it. Like, it's really a platform for exploration. So
Absolutely.
I would have to see. That's also one of the thing I told with Andrea during the symposium was I would love to do workshops based on the tool that I've showcased. I haven't think that through yet, and like when you suggested, for example, last week, oh, everybody put the headset on and we tried together, I was like, absolutely not. I think it would be great, but I'm not ready for this, and the tool has too many bugs basically to be done that reliably. But I would definitely, I can imagine doing this step by step, where we do end up in the headset and not just, let's say, typing, but typing to change the environment around us and doing little exploration, let's say dark mode or not. And those individual experiments can be shared with each other. So that's definitely something I can envision. I need to sit down and think how that can be done as let's say a workshop, either again face to face, let's say in 5 months, or remote, which would be ideal, but can be a little bit tricky. But I'll think it through.
I would definitely be at your disposal for that, Fabian, pretty much any time. I just wanted to show you a few different views here to illustrate the kind of thing I'm talking about. That is a bit surprising to me. So this, of course, the warm, and then the gray, which has a very different feeling. I often use this. But this surprised me too, having a slider for the width. It's an amazing thing, because depending on what kind of reading or writing or editing I'm doing, I really sometimes need most of the screen to fill up with text. But sometimes if I'm careful reading, I need this. But to not have a toggle, but to have my hand be able to do this, it really makes a huge difference. And when it comes to the dark mode, it's been a really interesting exploration, such as in order for bold to mean anything, normal text has to be gray. Because if it's just bold in the same gray, you cannot see it. That's bad. So that's been one level. And then finally, Here in Photoshop, I've mocked up a dark mode with a background of blue, so you can turn your monitor down. And the other one, it's beautifully grayed, whatever, pretentious. But here it's much more functional. The opposite of that is a light mode that is lighter, meaning this text is not flat, it is mid-gray, which also for some reading is a much more pleasant thing, but sometimes you need the contrast. But to try to figure out what works for when you're reading or editing and so on, it's really, really fascinating. I think it'd be worthwhile. I'm glad that you guys seem to agree to start experimenting with those aesthetic effects in VR.
A quick thing. I just heard Fred, you said, you know, when you're writing, you want to write in one column and read in two. I thought that was interesting because was that relating to the fact that people would say that narrow newspaper columns are faster to scan read, or were you thinking in terms of seeing stuff effectively in a double layout? Because which comes back to the point I made in the chat thing, that another thing we're battling against are forgotten paper-based preconceptions about how things should be. You know, so for a lot of people who say word processing, the picture in their mind will be of a faux piece of white paper dangling probably somewhere in space, onto which letters will magically appear. I mean, it doesn't have to be like that, but in a sense, I mean, on one level, there's nothing wrong with it, but another way, we're consciously dragging forward a legacy medium and not necessarily meaningful. So I was just wondering what the double column was meant there.
I'll show you. That's a good question. One of the reasons I think that that's not right, that we like to read books is that we can open them and have a track down the middle to hold our thumb.
Mm-hmm.
So this is happened to be my journal exported. And to use the screen real estate, it's much easier to read in columns. It's not necessarily copying paper. It's just otherwise it gets to be so wide. So that is something that I happen to like, but I'm not at all saying this should be mandated for all reading. Of course, different reading views should be different for different people in different ways. And I could easily see that maybe 3 columns will be better, etc. Hi, Brandel. I'm at the club, so I don't have video. Just briefly, I see Fabian has his hand up. We're just talking about the idea of what the aesthetics of reading and writing and VR are. I met a psychologist on a flight over who was fascinated by the dark mode in Author, and that sparked the discussion of how important that is. When you have your entire visual field controlled, we might as well optimize it. Sorry, Fabian.
Yes, well, so I thought a bit back since you asked the question. Maybe one way that could be done is, I'll stick to dark mode as an example, is doing a little workshop, extremely small group, like just one person at the beginning, and how can you implement dark mode through such an environment, and with like minimum, what's the shortest path with minimum programming or complexity to go from your idea to it, even if it's at least at the beginning documenting it, but in the environment itself, and being able to share the result with others after, and also potentially with me to get some feedback and iterate, so that during your next session you could follow up on it. So I'm gathering the different issues I had related to demos, like we tried a bit earlier, but specifically on, let's say, a feature that someone else wants to implement. So that's a good starting point, and dark mode is an interesting feature. I don't want to say feature, but let's say experiment that a lot of people could relate with. So I'll try to document or think of how, let's say you would be in the headset, you have this ID on the spot. How would you be able to test it conveniently to see if it makes sense or not, and document it in the headset?
Yeah, I think it would be really brilliant, Fabian, to do that. And also the notion of what is behind the text, because the kind of visual person I am, I can't really concentrate if there's a huge visual field behind what I'm working on. I need a wall or something. I need to feel cozy. So how do you define that? Is it just a plain white wall? Is it a structure like you have currently? Will it be a gradation? I think, you know, these are very far away from the incredible interactions that we want. But I think they have a huge amount to say about the actual comfort. So the backspace also will be something. Yeah, my voice is obviously bad here. Anybody else want to address Carl's question? Okay, I'll address Carl's question. We're going all over the place, Carl. We're hoping to have some sort of a demo day in about 6 months. And one of the things we're talking about now is the visual aspects of plain old Tycoon in VR. But that goes to a lot of other discussions on how to interact with the world. But it's also a kind of image map. So it is the basics of what such a space is and what it is for different people. Because obviously people of different cognitive styles will have different cognitive needs for how things are arranged around them. So I could say this is relevant to possibly what you're interested in too.
Okay, thanks. My screen actually went, this is actual screen of mine a while ago, so I figure I'll use this for some VR stuff. Yeah, actually, yeah, there's Denny and we have the upcoming workshop this week, so there could be quite a bit of activity around metadata or accessibility of VR kind of thing. I'm following up several leads on that. And just wanted to mention, I did find a site recently. There's something called Bionic Reader, which there's actually like 3 variables and stuff, but it actually can help people read faster. And I actually contacted the guy to see if any work's been done with how effective it could be for people with dyslexia and things. I'll post a link to it here and stuff. But yeah, so, and as I said, there's actually a whole XR accessibility community that's quite large. They have an annual symposium and stuff. So looking to make connections, and I'll be able to give you an update probably like 2 weeks and stuff. So yeah, I only have a few minutes on to drop off fairly soon.
All right, thanks, Carl. So, Randall, in the beginning of the conversation, while we were filling in, Mark talked about what is a image map in VR and what happens when it's folded, stuff like that. Bob Bourne got a bit annoyed and signed off. But these are pretty crucial questions if we're going to be building something for a demo day. And, you know, we can store it any way anybody wants to, but I also want it to be in Visual Meta, of course, whenever possible. So it's really good that Mark is studious about what things are, but I think we could feel free in this group to invent new things, provided they work and provided anybody can copy them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's also a challenge that lots of different interaction systems encounter in terms of what is the sort of the presentational requirement of an object versus the semantic requirement for understanding how to interact with it. One challenge that occurs whenever a medium becomes more mature is that people believe that they have the answers to it, and they can sort of dictate more and more aspects of it. And so, you know, the early web was obviously very hard for people to wrangle, and so they just wrote pretty plain pages But then as people's familiarity with what they thought the presentational mode was going to be, they ended up increasingly opinionated about not just what to do with it, but the way that it was, not just, both what it was and how it looked. And the one particular zenith of that was fully image map based websites that said things like, this website is best viewed at 1024 by 768. When it's like, yes, but is it really worth your deciding that? And then mobile websites, the reality and the necessity for people to build CSS that was able to accommodate both a phone and a computer came to the fore. But now people have those two modes. They believe that they've covered all of the bases. I have, reasonable expectation that that is inadequate, and that at some point in the future there will be systems and media that will have to kind of go back to basics in terms of the representation of not what to do with things, but what can be done in a sort of semantic way, rather than being opinionated about the specific mechanisms for it. Accessibility is one reason, but just the change in the breadth and modality of input that people should sort of hope to expect is another. Image maps is really interesting, because right now, as Fabian knows, WebXR is kind of the worst of all worlds in terms of having to be extremely opinionated about exactly everything about how you produce a document. There is no document in WebXR. There's only pixels, and they are pixels not of a world, but for your eyes. And so you have to build everything from the ground up, and it's terrible. So image maps are, I think, a really important kind of reference point for how we can get back to a point where there might be semantically relevant regions in a world that we can interact with, and it would be up to a system. They're called user agents, like a browser as a user agent, to decide how or if somebody has interacted with something, and then a website or a page or an experience, whatever you want to call it, would only be responsible for saying, here's a region, and when you interact with it, however you interact with it, this thing happens. We're a ways away from people realizing that that's going to be a necessity, but it'll come.
Another link thing that it's really useful to hear that, because the reason it's taken me a while to finish out this thing on image maps is every time I work on the document, it falls to dust in front of me, because I realize there's yet another sort of fallacious assumption. The opinionated view that you describe, that it doesn't really stack up, except as a past reference, which doesn't really help us with where we're going. Another thing that I've been thinking about is that on one level, we said, well, fine, we'll use a web metaphor, we'll bring stuff in, and maybe we'll just reference a URL. Well, that's interesting, given that another part of our conversation is about things like visual meta, which is about not leaving important data as roadkill on the historical highway. So it sort of becomes, well, so do you, for instance, might you have a thing where you have an object that's actually carrying some data and it's doing like an internal reference, so that you're not having to attach vast amounts of data to basically an object or an interaction area in something, but it doesn't have to go off and speak to the world at large in order to just know what it has to do next, because then there is more scope for breakage than we might allow. I mean, again, it's another rabbit hole. I'm just busy sort of thinking my way down, but it goes to the same thing, because then you begin to have, well, if we want a better word, opinions about what's a necessary and sufficient amount of stuff to carry along with you before you have to step out and dereference at a wider scope. I mean, it all sounds boringly technical, but I guess it's the equivalent of being able to, get anything without talking to the whole world, as opposed to being able to get something if, something reasonable.
Right, and there are tons of practical safety concerns related to who knows you're looking for something, and on what basis can they connect the dots between those things. The modern reality, as Fabian has mentioned recently, of surveillance capitalism, Twitter, is something that is very much upon us at this point, and short of regulatory or legislative protections against it, then it's something that needs to be at the top of the minds of people who are responsible for creating the sort of navigation expressions for how to reach information, and what kind of countervailing pressures we can provide to make sure that that one, that like everybody can't find everything that everybody is looking for, and two, that it shouldn't be even understood to be a reasonable expectation for the sort of the interchange formats of the future. It's a tricky one. We have a USD, that's the Universal Scene Description Format, working group inside our organization, and they're slowly realizing the sort of the internety concerns and problems that come with making anything that becomes browsable, because before they were sort of ex-Pixar and Industrial Light and Magic, and so they saw it as pieces of a movie. But yeah, the concerns of like the just incredibly far-reaching concerns of reaching this piece from that and having those things related to each other, they have, you know, phenomenal benefits. Nelson's insistence on provenance and visible sort of relationships is very well, made as a point, but it's hard, it's dangerous.
Peter?
Yeah, there are lots of times that I'd actually like to have what I'm doing be findable. And I think we should be able to just basically draw a distinction between public research and private research. And if I'm in public mode, I want to leave tracks, and I want people to know what books I've been reading, so that if I pick up a book, it'd be just incredibly invaluable to me if I could find out who read that book before, who publicly read that book before and doesn't mind my knowing that they'd read that book. And that would be an incredibly powerful networking aid. And I had arguments with librarians about this, and we'd better not have the data available anywhere, because heaven forbid someone shows up with a subpoena and forces us to disgorge it. But if the data doesn't exist, then we're safe. And at the same time, you're crippling the ability of the research community that wants to be operating in a public networking mode like we are, from being able to most effectively leverage each other's efforts.
Yeah. So lots of interesting perspectives. Fabienne, have you thought about more how you'd like to have this demo day? My only real wish would be for it to be before the end of the year. Because it would be nice to have a write-up of it in the book so we can publish it the year before Apple VR.
Before the end of the year, like before the end of this year, like in 2 months?
Yes.
So 2 months is a lot less than 6 months.
I didn't know you were a mathematician too.
I have some ambitions.
Maybe we could have like a smaller event then, like a getting ready event, because I really, an academic document is cited mostly by year. And I'm really trying to get some of our dreams down, that. And I think what you're suggesting is so powerful and useful and so real that it would be really, really nice to get it. But of course, we could do something bigger later, or if you think it's completely not feasible, that's fair enough too.
I mean, sure, I'm always up for meeting up to build stuff. In practice, until November, I'm very much unavailable. But after this, could be. I sent a link also to, there is something, I think it's on IEEE VR, maybe there is a competition on the 3D UI. And I think that could be an interesting basis, because basically it's a competition. I don't necessarily like the idea of a competition like hackathon with prize and stuff like this. But the one thing that it does is help to focus. Like everybody agrees we have one theme, and even if it's not exactly the thing we're most interested by or with, at least we have, let's say, a clearer goal that makes it easier to reach, even if we reuse it completely differently after. So that might be a way to do something faster and with just a shorter time scale, basically. I'll put the link in the chat, but maybe something with this kind of format where it's, or let's say a workshop with dark mode or something like this. But the earlier we have to do something, and then the better defined, unfortunately, it has to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I saw that before. I'm just thinking, there is this notion with some people like Elon Musk that at some point we'll just plug a cable into our brains. The question still becomes, how will we interact with whatever goes through that cable? Right? So then it's a matter of you're going to have to recreate hands and recreate eyes. It's a bit, of course, something like that will happen at some point, but it's also ridiculous. So what I'm really thinking about in this conversation today is having a VR writing environment is almost like that. If you're looking at just text and nothing advanced, because it's almost like, you're lying on a sofa or whatever, you close your eyes, you're trying to think and you're concentrating. And imagine when your eyes are closed, if you could now just write some notes about what you're thinking or to read something. That is essentially what this is. But our brains haven't evolved to work in an empty space. So the actual appearance of the text and the actual space around it, behind it, and on the sides will really come into play based on how our visual system actually works. This is something that is so basic that I at least have overlooked it. Because when I see the text you guys show, it looks nice. But it is still completely basic. At some point, even with the most advanced VR systems, probably sometimes you'll want to read or write completely quietly, right, in such an environment. What would it actually be? It would be interesting to play around and experience. So this, what you're working on, Fabian, if one of the modes or aspects could be as simple as what we talked about here, not about links or about this and that, just, I mean, I'm sorry for rambling on, but it is amazingly, insanely incredible what we're talking about. It literally is like closing your eyes and having the entire field of view to work on. It's wow, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the whole rationale for me of reaching into Extended Mind as a book. And for any of you who haven't read that Mixed Feelings article that Sunny Baines wrote in Wired, it's really important. It's about sensory prosthesis. I'll grab the link for anybody who hasn't. If you have, yeah, I'll grab it. Mixed. Yeah, she.
I know her, by the way. How weird is that? I just realized.
You know Baines? That's awesome. She's very, very clever, a very interesting person in terms of her perspective on technology development. So the summary of the article is that it's a survey of then current sensory augmentation, sensory prosthesis, I think she calls it, as of 2007. And I should write a where are they now, because I've been following most of the people cited in the article since then, and have put together where they are. Some of them have came to nothing. Some of them managed to really do some other stuff. But the idea is that if you can make senses, if you can take something like they've got a compass belt, something that tells you which way is north by virtue of buzzing, then it manifestly changes in a very deep way how you understand things like direction or space or light or any of those things. And the consequence is that you can incorporate it into your behaving and your reaction, your reflexive thinking, in a way that you simply can't if you have to be looking at a compass on your wrist or holding it in your hand. Simply knowing those things as a matter of course is a fundamental change in terms of what you understand. In the same way that some people simply do not have a time sense. Some of my good friends don't know the difference between 2 minutes and 20 minutes. It's debilitating, but the opposite can be true as well. Once you know what directions are, once you know what distances are in that visceral sense, then it really changes things. My sense, sorry to wade back into the musky stuff, Fabian, but is that but it's for a good cause, I promise, is that yes, of course, we'll tighten the gap between brain and sort of environment, and in terms of between brain and our actions on those things. But the specific, this is what we have to do in order to shorten that gap, in order to understand what shortening that gap does and means, and what we should be targeting as the next set of things. It's making sure that whatever word processing systems, anything else that we have, are attuned and respond to in an immediate way, in order to be able to do our thinking as reflexively as possible. That's why I slave over learning all of the shortcut keys for all of the programs like Blender and Illustrator and Photoshop and all of those things, so that I don't have to think about anything except what I want when I'm doing those things. And virtual reality is a place where that can be amplified. That can be where the sort of the orientations and the inputs of what we have can be that much more fine grained. We talked, so like Anne, who was one of the very helpful organizers of the day, is a flautist, and she is good with instruments, and the way that she holds her hands and her mouth in order to be able to do all of that stuff has completely gone beyond conscious thinking, and is simply for being able to produce those sounds. But it's still sort of bound by physics and by the expectations of what can be kind of encoded and remembered and things like that. So this is critical for being able to change what it is that human minds can do with the world. And virtual reality is, as Fabian knows as well, like not the last stop; it's just the first in terms of what kind of computing environment we can cobble together that is able to infer enough rich context about our intent, our orientation, our perspective, our mental state, and provide some level of sensory sort of response feedback in terms of visual and auditory systems. But the fact that we can create Tesla suits, that's not to do with the cars, but to do with the electromagnetic effects and things that can provide force feedback on the surface of our bodies. They're expensive, but they are interesting in terms of what kind of meaning they can confer to people who are actually participating in a system where they understand the inputs. So yeah, it's a really, really big deal to look at what those aesthetics do, as you were saying, Frode, and to recognize that those reflexive kind of environmental ambient things that we build these systems out of are really constructed carefully to understand what kind of impact they have on us and how we can respond.
Because while you were speaking, Brenda, I only slightly flippantly put in a picture of the Harry Potter thing and the person pulling his thought out of his mind. And the reason I thought of that was really this thing about saying, well, when you talk about embodiments and things, it's to what extent is this interface? We did this. First of all, we had a pen or a stylus, and then we have these things now. And we have virtual ones of these. But if you stop to think, okay, but wait a minute, this is only the Roman chariot tracks again. We're making a facsimile of this because, in a sense, this is the way. And you can get on about the Dvorak keyboard and the QWERTY keyboard and that sort of thing. But so if you step beyond that, so well, if what I'm actually trying to do is to pull my thought and my idea fully formed with the least friction of rekeying, then maybe you look at other ways. And I'm sure that's a long way off. I'm not proposing thinking that anywhere in the immediate term this sort of thing might happen, but it's useful and informative to sort of echo what you're saying, to start thinking in those terms rather than saying, oh, can I build a better 3D keyboard? Because I don't think that's where we should be heading. Great.
I think we should be heading that way, at least one of the directions. I think we need to go multiple directions. So I also, of course, agree with you, Mark. But in defense of the keyboard, one of the interesting things it does, it pulls you towards your media. Unless you're one of those lean back and the keyboard will bite you type persons. you lean in. So this is what's so bizarrely interesting between reading, writing, editing, and research. You will have different body postures. You will want different backgrounds. You will want different information interactions. So when we talk about Xerox PARC and modeless, was also modeless again and again, we can now relax, and just like Brendel introduced VR to the group, we can just accept that maybe modes are fantastic, and maybe the way we toggle between modes might be something we look at. Maybe one of the modes we want in VR is a mechanical keyboard. Why not? And then again, maybe one mode we want the speech, and lots of other things in between.
I would love for somebody to use Doug's brick pencil, for a bit, to think about the impact that it has on their writing. I am really in favor of modes being reflective of a particular set of priorities. But the corded key set, that's good. No, but I mean the brick, having a pencil attached to a brick, because I would love to see brick poetry. What is it that you determine is worthwhile enough to be able to commit to the arduous process of lifting up a whole damn brick? I don't know, Jim, are you familiar with the Doug Engelbart's deaugmentation?
I'm just putting a pic in the sidebar.
Well, you were muted there, Jim, sorry.
Just a little bit, even though he lived a mile away. I have met him, and I have studied some of his stuff, but I think that's one area that I'm especially interested in pursuing with this group. So I'm right now in listening mode.
Good. So the long and the short of it is that Doug Engelbart wanted to create the anti-brick pencil, saying that if you think about what you would do with a pencil attached to a brick, and the way that you would sort of go about writing and what you would decide is worth writing, then it's fundamentally different to if you just take the brick off the pencil. And so, the whole sort of premise of augmenting human intellect is to remove the other brick that's on the pencil, and so that it can fly as freely and as perfectly as we desire. But I think that there are some really interesting sort of characteristics, if not strictly benefits, of being able to look at things with a range of modalities. I certainly find that when I write in script with a pen on a piece of paper, that the consequence is different to if I was simply typing. I'm a pretty fast typist. I'm much slower, and I'm also a pretty messy writer. And so if I intend to commit something in a way that means that it remains legible, then there are some things that I've got to do that are different. And the result of that, for better or worse, is that what comes out is a little bit more thoughtful. One of the challenges that I find with people believing that simply shortening those gaps is going to be an objective good is that they, I believe, overstate the internal completeness of what the mental processes that undergird creative production actually are. And that's, again, one of the things that I was objecting to within the context of the symposium is that when people are genuinely involved in creative work, rather than merely observing it from an outside and a sort of a finished perspective, then the myriad choices they have to make are that creative work. And until you can intervene in those processes in an artificial intelligence mediated way, then you are not creating work with AI. You're simply paying a free. You're just a customer for a contractor who happens to be an artificial intelligence instead. The feedback loops are essential. But yeah, the specific form those feedback loops come in can change drastically, and they should, depending on what it is you want to do and at what time. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I need the anti-brick pencil as I take notes right now.
Well, it's one of the things that is really interesting is size and volume. I remember the McLuhan thing, or what's the difference between a movie and a picture? It's how many frames a second you see a slightly different picture, right? So quantity does completely change quality in some instances. And if we look at text specifically, imagine being in a writing room and your job is to write one paragraph. You know, we can build the most beautiful environment for that. Really good line spacing. All of those factors can be really, really optimized. It's not that hard. It's something I love doing, and I keep doing it with Author. It's an indulgent, fun, and useful thing. However, now you have 200 pages of text, and you need to make sense of it. It's a completely different experience. So to be able to toggle through the different tools or environments or modes or moods you need, I think is going to be absolutely key, because what did the internet do? Amongst many things, it meant that the information in the library was not instantly accessible. I think VR, with the views we keep talking about, view space, I think one of the things VR will do, because it's the king of views, is potentially give you not infinite, but instant access to different views of your work. And with that, one thing that I've learned going through a lot of different keyboard shortcuts for Author is that even I get them wrong sometimes, and I designed with that. So the mobility we have of our hands, the control we have with our hands, is probably going to go, as you know, we've seen in the work of Randall and Fabian. If we can go in there and literally move things around, let's say we just twist our hand and the color changes, but whatever it might be, let's pretend we're standing in a space where wherever you slip your arm, there's like a cylinder, so you can tune different things. We have such fine control. So to use the system of physicality we already have spent our entire lives learning how to use in VR would be absolutely tremendous, rather than pretending it isn't there and it's just instantly going to fit our brains. Thanks for hopping in, Fabian. I could have gone on for another 2 hours.
One quick thing and one, let's say, shortcut that I took in the demo, but I still think it's an easy answer, is I think the new modalities, the new ways to interact with content is the most interesting. It's literally what we've never been able to do before. What was it, yesterday or 2 days ago? I was on the floor of my kitchen, and then I looked at the ceiling preparing a presentation. It's like, oh, I started to imagine the text on the ceiling with a different slide of the presentation. And then I started to move them around. And it's not something I would normally do. But because a couple of minutes or hours before I was doing it in VR, I brought it there. So those, in my opinion, that's the core interest and where effort should be. But what I do in the demo, for some of you who did tries, even though actually I don't think it was working there on the day, so I just maybe said it, but it works with the keyboard. And because I think there are something that are still way more interesting or efficient with this, like the number, it's not the same kind of interactions. You can't do this, like rotating your hand to change the shape of a cylinder or something like this, but also typing code with the accolades and the parentheses and whatnot. This way also doesn't make sense. And giving up on either, I think it's not so interesting. So if we can bring, let's say, this kind of old interfaces, but yet so efficient for some of the things we do and we actually enjoy, I think it's at least it's a good compromise at first. And I think, yeah, that's a little bit one of the, I think it's one of the I don't want to say what's one of the novel thing of the demo was like, yeah, both are good. The keyboard to type code or text, but still the hands to manipulate it, not giving up on either one past medium, let's say text, or way to interact with it, let's say keyboard.
Has anyone developed a system that can recognize hand gestures from an ordinary webcam?
Yes.
Yes. I'm just looking. Zoom doesn't do it, but the WebEx, which is one of the sort of the corporate equivalents of it, actually does recognize waves and thumbs up and thumbs downs, so that you can just do those on camera. Some people have even built, I'm not sure of the total quality of it, systems that allow for some level of reading sign language, and so that they can then turn that into from text to speech, and render that an audible artifact. And I think that's very, very interesting as a way of being able to directly and immediately equate those things. Oh, you got a late motion there?
Yes, also there are different like motions, old and new ones, and also other depth sensor or camera dedicated to this. So recognizing hands and gesture, there are plenty of ways, and including with the traditional webcam. But the one thing I think is important to remember is most of them don't, and even if they were to be able to master depth, so like how far your hand is, you would still, if you were to do it through a screen, because if that's where you're going there, Peter, it's going to technically work, but it's still not going to be the same experience of moving an object in space while you can look at it. And it's a huge difference. So technically it's interesting for sure, and it can be done, and we can put links and reference in the chat, but it's not the same experience as moving a 3D object while being in a 3D space with it, being able to change viewpoint, and especially even picking a 3D object in space without changing viewpoint, it's actually pretty hard. So you naturally tend to move a bit to the side to adjust the depth. So I'm just giving like a warning there that even if it's feasible to do hand gesture and recognition and tracking with a normal camera, if the result itself is on a 2D screen, it's not the same result.
You were reading my mind there.
Yeah, I mean, that said, there are probably, like, if you can get it so that you are also creating a head tracked position, albeit on a monoscopic display surface, then you may be able to get somewhere there. But there's the, I'm sure we've mentioned to death the concept of the uncanny valley. It was originally coined for the benefit of talking about robotics, and something getting close enough, basically to explain the film The Polar Express starring Tom Hanks. But it's when things get too realistic, they get gross. And Pixar really struggled with it with Finding Nemo, and some of the overruns in the timeline were because when you start putting human faces on fish, then things get gross fast, and so they had to pull back from that. But the concept of uncanny valley comes in all kinds of places. It doesn't just have to be representing robots and humanoid figures. It's also to do with it, like in general, it's to do with the mismatch between senses being problematic. So if you have terrible garbage physics in a video game, then you don't expect them to be better. But once they start approaching that, yes. Sorry, Mark, it looks like Mark's still recording, or possibly once you drop, we'll have to restart.
Yeah, I gotta go, but I'll be listening in a second. Sorry, I forgot about. I had a meeting in town, so I have no choice. Anyway, I'll join you in a second. Mark, you're gonna record, right?
Oh, you want me to start recording? Okay, fine. Yep. Record on this
computer. See you all in a few minutes.
I'm
hopefully we don't get dumped.
For better or worse, I'm now recording.